Hello, my name is Owen, and welcome to a review of Brandon Sanderson's Words of Radiance, where I answer the question, is Words of Radiance great? Some of you may know I'm doing a reread of the Stormlight series in preparation for Book 5 coming out this December. So I'm stuffing a lot of Stormlight into a little time, okay? And it's mostly just to refresh myself on what the heck happened in these books, because it's been years since I read them. But also, just kind of to revisit them and see if they held up as well in real life as they did in my brain. Because Brandon Sanderson, was, like many people, was my proper introduction to modern fantasy. And then when I finally read Stormlight, I really fell in love with it. I really loved those books. And, some people are like, oh, Rhythm of War wasn't as good. Like me, no, I was drinking the Kool-Aid. It was all great. And then revisiting it, if you saw my Way of Kings video, that book held up fantastically. I think it's a great entry, a great first entry into an epic modern fantasy series. I thought it hit all the boxes. It was fun. It was engaging. The characters are great. It's long, but it pays off with an amazing climax. And I was extraordinarily excited because when I read Stormlight the first time, Words of Radiance was by far my favorite book of the four. And a lot of moments when I think of great fantasy literature moments, I think of things that happen in this book. So I was very, very excited to reread it, just to set the tone for you. However, things did not go exactly as planned, and I do have an intellectual hypothesis as to why this was the case. I'm very excited to discuss it with you all because, like I said, I think it's hard to write a better introduction to a fantasy series than Way of Kings. I think the way that the world building was paced out, the introduction to these characters was great. The only complaint that I had was I found the interludes to kind of mess with the rhythm of the book a little bit, and then that complaint still applies. It's just the format of these books, right? It's kind of like you're in the moment with these characters interspersed with interludes of very far down the road foreshadowing or just Cosmere references and the wider universe stuff. And just something, if you don't know this about me, if you haven't seen my other videos where I talked about this, I'm not a huge fan of the Cosmere wider universe. Hint, hint, this character was from this character, if you remember them. I simply don't remember them because it's an obscure reference, first of all. It's a side character in a side book of his that I might not have read. And it's also he changes their names, so it's you'd have to know them by the way that they say certain phrases that would cue you into saying that this name is not their real name, but their real name is this name. I don't enjoy that puzzle making part, which I know some people do, but I don't like we need to call in the Avengers from the other planet of this book universe. And it happened more in your face in the second era of Mistborn. My least favorite parts of his books, period, was when it starts really getting into oh my God, it's the guy from Stormlight. He's coming to save the day. It should not be that way. And I understand what he's trying to do. He's trying to make the MCU. And I just think more and more the negative things I have about the MCU and the negative things I have about the Cosmere, they're one and the same because they're trying to do the same thing. And we'll actually talk about that a little bit more later. But that's just the structural complaints that carries over from Way of Kings. However, just in general in this book, upon a reread, I found this book far too long. Far too long. And I know it's a common complaint. These books are monsters. This paperback edition is 1,300 pages. But when I read them the first time, I'm yeah, they're long, but it's good. There's no fluff. And it's hard for me, I can't pinpoint out, you could have cut this 200-page arc, because it's not like he's wasting time with side plots or filler arcs necessarily. It's just the way things go on for so long, the story almost needs to be restructured in a way that it's shorter. It's not that, this could have been cut because it wasn't important to the story. Brandon Sanderson's a good enough author to not do that. It's just can he structure them so it is shorter? The first 600 pages of this book, I found borderline tedious because nothing was really happening. Everyone was kind of in the tension from Way of Kings has dissipated. Obviously, the book starts off with a bang with Shallan in the shipwreck and her being left alone. That was the only danger that our main characters were in, because Dalinar kind of settled into his position. Callan was settled into a position where he was just captain of the guard and he didn't really have any threat of life. Whereas in Way of Kings, He was a slave. He was constantly going on bridge runs. He was constantly in danger. He was constantly having to fight for his survival. And I get character-wise, you can't keep him in that like same level of tension, but that was really the heartbeat of that book. Especially like it was his backstories, it was his flashbacks. That was really a Kaladin book, and his story was in constant turmoil. And it kind of, when it first started, I thought it was going to be the same way with Shallan, because obviously it's her backstory, it's her flashbacks, it's her with the shipwreck, it's her being on the road. But even like when she's just traveling to the Shattered Plains, it just kind of like mosey on, right? Like she's not, you don't get the sense that she's in constant danger. And that coupled with Kaladin being in a relatively stable spot and Dalinar being in a relatively stable spot, there's just the characters are kind of rudderless for a lot of this book, for like I would say like the first 700 pages or so, because Dalinar doesn't really know. He knows he has to unite them, but he still doesn't know what that means. Kaladin knows he has these powers, but he doesn't really know what they mean, and he doesn't really know where he fits into this society now that he's captain of the guard. And then Shallan is such a mysterious character where she doesn't know what she wants for herself. So even though she's the most like she has the most concrete goal, I'm getting to the Shattered Plains, I'm going to fulfill Yasna's, so I'm going to continue her research. She is the most like straightforward in her goal, but her character is the most vague. And that's another thing that I feel like kind of took a lot of momentum out of this book, is Shallan's backstory, her flashbacks. Because, and I think it's an interesting concept for a character. And listen, people love to say like, I love to skip her chapters. And when I did my review of Way of Kings, I'm like, you guys are idiots. Her chapters were great. They weren't boring at all. But I understand like where they're coming from. And the reason why that is the case, or at least my theory as to why that is the case, is she is a character who is consistently throughout the entire series, it's like built upon like reveals of who she really is. Kaladin, we know him in and out. Dalinar, we really know him in and out, especially after book 3. But she is a character where like, her whole like power set is built upon these lies that she's like shoving deep down in herself, that she won't even tell herself. So like these are kind of like reveals as to her character. And obviously this book ends with the reveal that like her mother was not killed by her father, it was killed by her. Like she killed her own mother. And Pattern was with her the whole time. She was a Radiant the whole time. And it's just an air of mystery about this character. And because of that like concept of the character, her flashbacks are incredibly dull. Because at least with Kaladin's, like I found his like to be a little slow too in general, because it's just taking us away from the present day action. But I understand like why it's structured that way. I don't think it's a bad thing that they're structured that way, that it slows down the pace a little bit. But the problem with her backstory is she's a little girl throughout the whole thing, so she doesn't really do much. And it's also, Sanderson has to keep this veil of vague in what really happened and where's this going, what's this about, because the reveal is what happened. So it's like he's keeping a secret from us, and yet he's giving us a backstory, but the backstory can't reveal what we're revealing, because that has to happen in the present day for her character to grow to another level. Does that make any sense? Like in order for her to unlock the next level up, she has to come to grips with what happened in the past. And so the past, for the majority of the book, the past sections of the book cannot reveal what she needs to reveal herself in the present day. It just doesn't work. Giving her flashbacks doesn't work in the conceit of the structure, or the structure of the series, in my opinion. So I think that, coupled with like the interludes, as some people like to put the puzzle together, I don't like to put the puzzle together. The backstories were slow for me. The interludes kind of ruined the pace for me, with the exception, I think the Parshendi backstory, I think Eshonai, I think she's a great character, and I really actually liked that interlude. They kind of took the place of Sazeth's interludes, where it'd be like fluff interlude, Sazeth, what's he going on? The Parshendi kind of took that place, because that was plot relevance. She appeared in the story every once in a while to talk to Dalinar, to talk to Adolin, and obviously the climax of this book is her plan come to fruition. So that's great stuff. I wish all the interludes had plot relevance, I guess is what I'm trying to say, because I thought hers were very entertaining. But the interludes that I didn't like, as few of them as they are, but mostly the backstory of Shallan, it just felt slow. And because these characters were kind of motivationless, there was no tension for the majority of the book. like it did drag for me. And the worst part is, and I've said this in multiple videos in the past, my favorite scene is like in the duel where Callan says, "Honor is dead, but I'll see what I can do." He jumps in the arena, he fights, and he wins. I was looking forward to that scene so much, and I think this one's on me because in my head, it's just like the most amazing thing ever. Like when I reread it again, I'm like, yeah, that was cool. So I kind of took the wind out of my own sails there. And then I think the ultimate climax of the book too, I forgot how this book ended because in my head the book ends with the duel and him saying that line, even though it's not even anywhere close to the end, and there was like 400 more pages left in the book, because the whole idea of like it was like to me the climax of this book, the battle, it seems very vague to me. Like there's like a ring of singers and they're singing, they're summoning the storm, and they're fighting and they're winning the fight, but they're losing the fight because the storm's coming in too quick, and then. I don't know. There's aspects that are good, and like what's Shallan doing with the portal, the Orthkid? Like what is she doing? Is she just standing around a slot and she's just fitting different shard blades in it? It all seems very vague to me. I think the best part of the ending is Kaladin when he re-embraces his oaths and saves Elkahar and kind of like re-accepts his oath, still comes back to him. That's a great scene. That's a great epic moment. But for the most part, like. I just felt like this whole book in general fell a lot more flat than I remember it doing, which is a shame. And I just think that if the epic moments of this book were still there, if this book was 300, 400, 500 pages shorter, I think it's a lot better. And I don't know how you do that. I don't know how you rewrite this book because you just can't make Shallan the flashback character for the reasons that I mentioned. And that kind of just ruins the structure of the series. It's not exactly what he's intending to do. So it just kind of, it's almost like you can't write it the way that I want it to be written. And that begs the question too. And here's what I really wanted to talk about. Obviously, I loved this book the first time I read it. Upon a reread, all of a sudden I'm Mr. Complaino over here. I'm poking holes like I'm trying to sink the ship. And it made me wonder, like, what is the more valid opinion, right? Because trust me, guys, trust me. When I say I'm not trying to be literary critic Craig, okay? I'm not trying to be, oh, well, actually, the themes are a little weak here. The prose perhaps isn't as strong as I'd like it to be. Sometimes I say stuff like that, but it's not coming from a place of pretension. I really wanted to have a lot more fun with this book on a reread. I wanted to have as much fun as I did the first time, right? So I just don't know, like, what's more valid, my opinion of me when I really enjoyed it the first time, or my opinion now where I'm like, it kind of went on for a little bit too long, definitely not as good as the first one. And it reminds me again of the MCU, bringing it back to that conversation where it's like, you watch a movie like Spider-Man No Way Home or Deadpool and Wolverine, where it's like you're in the theater, you're having a fun time. But for someone like me, when I rewatch those movies months later, maybe years later, in the privacy of my own home, all of a sudden, all like the fan service, all like the funny ha-ha, oh my God, it's this character from this character and they're coming to this character's place, it falls a lot more flat when you already know that it's coming. And I think that's what happened a lot with this book, where it's like I knew that the duel scene was coming. I knew Adolin wasn't in any danger. So, and without like I don't want to say depth because I feel like that's too harsh, but without like a strong purpose or goal in the story, like those popcorny moments aren't as powerful if you know how they're going to end going into them, right? Because I'm pretty sure, and I don't remember, I'm pretty sure the first time I read that scene, I thought like, Adolin's about to get he's going to get killed or crippled, and it's going to be Sadis's master plan, and all of a sudden they're going to be put on the back foot, right? So that tension like really propelled me through the scene the first time, and without that suspense, I just felt like a lot of the book and in that scene and just this whole book in particular, because I knew how it was going to end, it didn't benefit from me in a reread. And I feel like it's not just like, well, I know it's going to happen, so it's less entertaining. Because like, there are books that you can reread. I reread books all the time, guys. Just because I know what's going to happen doesn't mean I get less enjoyment out of it. Because the scenes are written so well, and it's so tight, and it's so like thematically resonant in some cases that like you can relive it and feel the same feelings. But that just didn't happen with this. And I don't know if that's or is that a sign of weak writing? I genuinely have no clue. And I know I talk about Malazan all the time, guys. But a perfect example, in spoilers for Book 2 of Malazan, Book of the Fallen, that book ends in tragedy. Okay, I guess that's a big spoiler. I'm not gonna go into details here. So the first time I read it, I'm like, it breaks your heart. The second time, on a reread, it feels almost inevitable, right? Or it's inevitable because you know it is inevitable. So you kind of catch the scenes of it being set, and that this is just not that kind of book. Like, you wouldn't foreshadow the duel. Like, that doesn't make any sense. It's not that kind of book. But because it's not doing stuff like that, because it's not a tragedy, or I don't know, it's just not a book where Sanderson should have set that up to make sense. So he doesn't. And then in that case, like, knowing the fun beforehand kind of spoils it a little bit for me. And I guess what I'm trying to say is, I'm struggling with the fact of like labeling this like, is Words of Radiance great? Because from the joy that I've experienced from it, the first time I read it, it is great. But I don't think it's a great book. I think it's a great artistic entertainment experience. Okay? And maybe it only works once. But I just think like I can't say like this is like a great book, this is a perfect sequel. Even though I might have said that after I finished it the first time. And that just shows like, and that's what I love about books, guys. Because the fact that I can just have two different books, one of them is a great reread, one of them only works once, just the fact that like books can work like that, but I both get enjoyment out of them at different times. Isn't that kind of amazing? And I think like to a wider conversation about Brandon Sanderson, a lot of like the arc of Brandon Sanderson enjoyers is this. You're like me. He introduces you to modern fantasy because he's easy to read, he's entertaining, it's popcorn in a non-derogatory way, it's popcorn fiction. You read it, you enjoy it, you kind of expand into the deeper fantasy, you find a book that you really love that maybe it's a little bit like, maybe more prose-oriented, poetically written perhaps, and then all of a sudden you throw Sanderson into the trash and say, oh, he's fluff. I only read deep literature now. I only read classics. I only read Lord of the Rings now. And where that comes from maybe is that like if when you revisit Sanderson, it's what happens, right? You already know what happens, so some of the heart pounding moments don't pound your heart again. And I just think that like it's amazing that he has this like authorial skill to like maybe give you a one-time hit of adrenaline. I just think it's interesting that authors can do that, or sometimes they can't do that in the way that they write. I don't know. I'm really not making a point, but I'm just trying to illustrate or illuminate this phenomena with this book. Because I loved it the first time. And I don't think I was stupider back then, is what I'm trying to say. I just think it's just not a book that's better a second time. So, therefore, I think it's not a great book. It's a good book. Very good book. It was great for me at a time. But right now, I cannot say that Words of Radiance is great. Which begs the question is, how is the rest of this series going to go for me? Because if Words of Radiance was my old peak, one of two things can happen. These books are going to get a lot worse for me. Because, you know, some people say, like, A Rhythm of War wasn't that good. And, like, maybe me, I just had my rose-colored glasses on, and I was like, no, it's good. And maybe that will just be really bad. Or maybe it's the opposite effect, and I'll appreciate those books more, and I'll think that they're better. Because the strange thing is, too, like, I was talking about, like, maybe Sanderson books just aren't good reread. That's not true, like, overall. Like, I reread Mistborn. Mistborn still holds up. It's a great book. And I just read Way of Kings a month ago, and that held up. So I think that's why I give this just a good and not a great. It's not a Sanderson issue. I just think in this book, he didn't craft it in a way that benefits on a reread, which for me, it takes it down from great to good, which is still good. Many books are just okay. Some books are bad. Some books are horrible. So good is good, and you should be happy with that, Brandon, because I know you were waiting with bated breath for me to give you that designation. But Way of Kings, it was great. It was reread. It was a fun reread. I did enjoy it. This one just doesn't hold up as much, I guess is what I'm trying to say. But I just can't emphasize enough how interested I am in this thought process, or this thought experiment. And I want you guys to chime in. Please chime in. I know I make the videos, but I need to hear you guys, please. Do you know what I'm saying about rereads though? It's like if you rewatch a movie maybe and you hate it the second time, what opinion is more valid? Because it's a piece of art and it made you feel something both times. And maybe it's because you changed so much, or maybe it's because it's just like this, where I just think that the art wasn't meant to be experienced twice, or wasn't designed that way, whether by intention or not. But overall, fascinating. Absolutely fascinating. And this is what I love about talking about books. It's like you just get to have these like epiphany moments. Because if I'm not, listen guys, I know the video is supposed to be over, but I gotta say this one more thing. If I wasn't making videos, right, and I was rereading Stormlight, I would reread it, I'm like, nah, it's mid. Put it away, start at the next one. But now we're in this world of like art and creating art. Should art be re-experienceable? Is that a requirement of greatness? Or can you make art that just like, it was only once, man. Like fireworks, perhaps. I don't really like fireworks though. Too loud in my opinion. But you can't say they're coming back. That exploded, right? And everything else is just a mere imitation. Oh, man, books. You gotta love them. You have to, or else why are you here? Be sure to like and subscribe if you like the video and you want to see more like in the future. And as always, thank you for sticking around 21 minutes and 44 seconds.